I promised myself I wouldn't screw this up. As the shuttle cut through the emerald haze above Orion University, I pressed a palm to the viewport and watched a city that looked like a dream sketched by a physicist. Sky bridges like harp strings, towers strung with slow-moving constellations, walkways for beings that slid, swam through air, padded, hovered, or unfolded like origami. My name tag hummed softly against my chest. Noah Cade, X.E. Change, Paul. Terran Union. And the oath I'd rehearsed 100 times unspooled in my head. Represent Earth well, avoid offense, observe customs, keep my curiosity from burning things down. I repeated the last part twice. At the arrival concourse, a guiding glyph swirled into Terran text. Dormitory Cluster C, Suite 11B, impulsed a path of light across the floor. I followed, weaving between a fractal of species. A crystalline educator dissolved and reassembled to slip through a doorway. A quartet of mist-bodied students argued by flashing internal storms. Someone with 3 elbows tried to high-five me. I missed all 3. The dorm tower rose like a silver reed. Inside, corridors widened and narrowed to accommodate body plans. The air adjusted its density with every breath. My door unlocked at a touch, sliding open to reveal a room designed for contradiction. On my side, a human bed, a desk, a shelf, a window glitching through nightscapes of a dozen worlds. On the other, a raised nest draped in chiffon canopies, a heat panel patterned like sun-dappled leaves, textured walls marked with faint glowing sigils that pulsed in a heartbeat I didn't recognize. I was halfway to setting my duffel down when I heard the door behind me sigh open. Footfalls like a dancer testing a stage. A small shift of air fragrant with citrus and heat. I turned, then forgot my oath, my breath, my name. She was humanoid, yes, but the word fell short. Orange fur-framed fox-like ears that flicked toward every sound, a sleek tail swayed, alive with its own grammar. Her face, though, human lines, expressive mouth, straight nose, amber eyes bright as candlelight over polished bronze. She wore a sleeveless charcoal tunic fitted at the waist, trousers slit to free the arc of her tail, and a slender torque of hammered copper at her throat. Light caught the fur along her shoulders and forearms, not a pelt, but a fine, luminous dusting that deepened the color of her skin. "Exchange," she said, voice low and precise, like a musician plucking a string. "Terran?" "Noah," I managed. "Noah Cade, human." I half offered a hand before every seminar on cross-species etiquette screamed don't. I rerouted into a wobbling half-wave. "Hi." She studied the aborted handshake, then me, then the travel dust on my boots. "Ria Solan Varik," she said. "Vulpine. I prefer quiet after dusk. I do not borrow, and I do not share pillows." "Great," I said, "because I am a wit. I excel at not sharing pillows." Her tail made a small, disbelieving curl. Then I remembered the one rule everyone had emphasized twice. Orion University enforced the Covenant of Distinctions, which forbade interspecies romance, framed as cultural preservation, enforced with expulsion and memory redaction. The torque at Raya's throat caught the light again. She stepped to her side of the room, touched the heat panel, and a soft warmth rolled over the nest. I set my duffel down and reminded my heart it belonged in my chest and not in my shoes. "Welcome to Auralis Noah Cade," Raya said, not unkindly. "Try not to get erased." I laughed, too loud. Her ears flattened for a heartbeat, then relaxed. My oath, I told myself. Don't burn anything down. And then I met her eyes and thought, too late. The campus was a contradiction made livable. Every corridor knew your lungs and learned your stride. Signs listened to your language and blossomed into it. The orientation chancellor, a stack of prisms wearing a goatee, because, as his interpreter said with a flicker of deadpan humor, he has developed a taste for flair, led us through policies with an elegance of angles, academic conduct, lab safety, grievance protocols, the covenant of distinctions. At Auralis, the interpreter relayed, we prize contact without conflation. Share knowledge. Do not collapse identities. The covenant protects the plurality that makes our society possible. I felt the room tighten. Around me, a dozen postures disguised the same reaction. A farce-on chorister's fingertips tapped the table in dissent. A chitinous scholar folded Pallas blue wings tighter. Beside me, a Terran named Lyla muttered, "Conflation is one word for it." The Chancellor glittered on. Violation is met with suspension, expulsion, or, in egregious cases, therapeutic memory revision. No one breathed. Afterwards, our cohort spilled onto a terrace hanging over a lake of dark glass. I found Lyla, who had already befriended 3 people, and a floating orb that hummed when it agreed with you. "Where are you housed?" she asked. C11B. She sucked her teeth. "Mixed species suite. Brave." "Optimistic," I corrected. "My roommate prefers quiet, and no shared pillows." The orb hummed dubiously. "And you?" I asked. "G4. Fully Terran. Which is good. I have an espresso machine contraband and no guilt to spread it." "You'll need it, Cade. Your eyes keep doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing that happens when you meet someone and your future gets weird." Lila's grin was soft, not teasing. "Be careful. The Covenant isn't a story beat here. It bites." When I returned to our suite, Raya had unspooled a roll of matte black fabric over her desk. The cloth shimmered with embedded circuitry. Patterns pulsed in intricate sequences. Vulpine tail sign, my implant suggested. Concepts carried by motion and rhythm. Her tail traced a curve, and a word formed in my head without syllables. Home. I pretended not to stare and failed. "You study?" I asked. "Diplomatic kinesis," she said. "And field ethics." The fox ears tilted. "And you?" Terrans arrive with 3 things: nervous humor, an unwise willingness to taste mysterious sauces, and ambition. "Cultural computation," I said. "Neurolinguistics. And I taste nothing alarming before midterms." Raya made a soft huff. Approval or amusement, I couldn't tell. Her tail hook wrote another word in air. "Noted." The torque at her throat glowed. "A message." She read, and something in her posture changed. Still and alert, a bowstring settling on a notch it knew too well. "Trouble?" I asked, gentle. "Noise?" she said, which was not an answer. "Sleep well, Noah." I lay awake longer than I admitted, turning the words Covenant and memory revision over until their edges felt sharp enough to cut. Classes began like storms. Sudden, exhilarating, dense with light. In neurolinguistic topologies, Professor Ithel, soft-voiced, 6-eyed, with a habit of sketching grammar as weather maps, introduced phase tenses used by species who perceive time as a braided river. If a mind divides events by resonance rather than order, Ithel said, its verbs carry currents instead of clocks. I thought of tales speaking words in the air. In comparative ethics, we debated the Covenant. The readings made cases elegant as proofs. The counterarguments bled with stories. When it was my turn, I said, "Protection that punishes consent collapses into control." Ithel arched a brow. "Noted?" they murmured. Engineering lab was both familiar and alien. Aurala's tools didn't beep, they sang. My group paired me with a float-bodied quasicrystal who whistled in fourths, and a swamp world mechanic who taught me to swear in a language full of bubbling consonants. We built a translation mesh that flexed around untranslatable words rather than breaking them. It fluttered in my hands like a brave insect and tried to render homesick as the scent of wet wool and burnt sugar. I told it that wasn't wrong. In the evenings I learned the rhythms of our shared space. Raya rose at dawn, warmed her nest with a palm, and rehearsed diplomatic kinesis, tail, ear, hand, shoulder, the choreography of meaning. She looked like a poem moving through gravity. I looked at my cereal, and the cereal looked back like, "Buddy, you're outclassed." We spoke in small portions. She wasn't cold, but her caution had edges. Sometimes her amber gaze lingered when I laughed with Lila in the hall, then flicked away as if snared by a rule she couldn't stop reading. Once, when I returned late smelling of ozone and success, her tail flicked. 3 quick beats, and the concept hit my implant as relief disguised as reprimand, found. She noticed my noticing and, without looking up, said, "The tail speaks before the mouth." "Mine doesn't," I said, "and it's rude with timing." A beat. Then a soft huff. The message torque glowed more often, small pulses like a distant lighthouse. She almost never volunteered what they said. I didn't press. Curiosity had edges too, and some edges cut trust. On the fifth night, a small box waited on my desk with a note, "For your midnight computations. Open only when destroyed." Inside, a contraband espresso device cobbled from legal parts and one questionable coil. I laughed, then choked, then laughed again. A second note had appeared on her side of the desk in a neat slanted script. "Do not tell Lila I enabled you." I brewed gratitude and tried not to learn to spell it with my eyes. If the Covenant was architecture, it was also theater. Posters around campus framed it as tapestry. Differences preserved, culture safeguarded, love sublimated into the grand project of plural survival. In class, we read an essay that argued desire across species was a colonial act. Another replied that denying it created the conditions of conquest. The debate folded into itself. The WhisperNet told a different story. In the Commons one night, someone had scrawled in ultraviolet chalk, "Siois is a language too." It was scrubbed by morning. The stone remembered a faint glow, as if the words had imprinted their absence. That same morning, we had our first joint seminar with diplomatic kinesis. The facilitator, a white-haired Valoran with opal skin, led us through exercises of presence and distance. The point, they said, was less to avoid offense than to avoid misreading. "You cannot promise safety by pretending you are not dangerous," they murmured. "The promise is made by how you carry your teeth." Raya's tale drew grammar without thinking. My breath tripped, trying not to watch. After class, we split by specialty. I ended up at a heat lamp table with Lila, a trio of bioacousticians, and a stone-bodied first year who spoke in hummingbird fast syllables. We tackled a case, a festival proposed by the exchange office that paired two species with incompatible sensory histories. The Covenant forbade pairing them romantically. What if the festival accidentally made that pairing likely? The room hummed with paradox. At the end, when the facilitator asked for reflections, I said what had been pressing against the inside of my ribs. Rules are built to constrain the worst of us. Here, the rule seems to constrain the best. The facilitator looked at the ceiling as if consulting a friend. "Perhaps," they said, "the rule assumes the best will not need it." Raya's head tipped minutely toward me. Agreement? Warning? That night, the torque at her throat glowed an urgent white. She read in stillness, then turned the screen away as if the motion itself was a secret. "You okay?" I asked. Her tail hooked, a shape that tasted to my implant like a word bitten in half. "We will be." "We is generous," I said. "Do not make me unlearn it," she replied. The softness in her voice snapped my oath tight and loose all at once. He arrived like an echo of a name you hadn't known you'd forgotten. I returned from the library to find a tall figure standing inside our door, slate blue skin, violet eyes the exact shade of twilight over steel. A coat whose embroidery caught light like wet ink. He held himself with the practiced ease of someone for whom rooms had always made room. Raya stood with her hands at her sides, not relaxed. The torque at her throat dimmed to a hard orange. "Noah," she said, "this is Lord Crix Malveron of House Lyneth. Crix, this is my roommate." The pause before roommate was the length of a match struck and blown out. Crix's gaze slid over me, curiosity the size of a pin. "Terran Union," he observed. "Tone what a jeweler uses to say paste. Exchange year?" "Ambition and mysterious sauces," I said, "because I sometimes choose death." He smiled the kind of smile that collects debts. How charming. "Crix," Rhea said, voice crisp, "you were not invited." "You were not answering," he replied, turning back to her with an intimacy that made the room smaller. "I feared you had begun to think you could outrun the obligations of your name." Raya's tail coiled not around her wrist, but along her palm, as if storing heat there. "I came to Oralis to study. My obligations are to my work." "And to your house," he said, gentle as a blade. "I should have left. I should have found a reason to stand in the hallway counting floor tiles. Instead, I heard myself say, some houses have doors. People walk out of them. Crix flicked a glance at me like a man brushing ash from a cuff. And some houses are cities, he said. Try not to get lost. He stepped closer to Raya, and for a sliver of a second her ears flattened. Fear, anger, disgust, a flash of something wound tight and hidden. Then she uncoiled it into I am Kel, they said, voice harmonized, as if three tones had agreed to share one mouth. The glass thread welcomes you, if welcome is the word for a correlation that finally resolves. I began, and Raya finished. Student network, she said. Advocates for reform of the Covenant. I thought you'd disbanded after the first inquiry failed. Disbanded? Kel smiled with most of their face. We metamorphosed. On good days we are a hypothesis. On bad days an error term. They led us into a chamber where maps of influence rotated like galaxies. Administrators connected by thin lines. Donors by thicker ropes. Students by filaments so numerous the display looked lit from within. One node pulsed a pearlescent violet. K.R. Lord Crix Malveron. We've tracked Crix since his appointment to the Heritage Committee, Kel said. Publicly, he is a patron of cultural preservation. Privately, he chairs the subcommittee on Covenant enforcement. Raya's ears tipped forward. He told me he had withdrawn from campus politics. He tells many kinds of story, Kel said. All true to him. They swiped a long, jointless hand. The map refocused on a dense cluster, a coming council session about funding the exchange program. Crix will reframe the debate, Kel said. Shift it from resources to risk. He will argue that cross-sensory exposure increases violation probability. He will cite 3 incidents, 2 of which he ceded. And you want? I asked. A Terran, Kel said simply. One who can ask questions that look like naivety and feel like knives. Malveron anticipates opposition from houses. He does not anticipate you. I'm flattered to be underestimated, I said. It's my best subject. Raya's tail brushed my sleeve, a single graze that meant a paragraph. Careful, seen, thank you. Kel arranged a smile between gravity and grace. He seeks leverage over those who weigh against him, they added. And, Raya Solanverik, your weight is considerable. Does he think me a fulcrum? Raya asked. Kel's smile thinned. He thinks you a prize. Raya's tail froze in midair, then drew a sign I did not know. My implant offered 3 possible glosses and apologized. Untranslatable. The word for the exact flavor of rage that knows its target doesn't believe it exists. The council chamber was designed to make speech feel like tide. Sound rolled along the carved ribs of the ceilings. Light fell in patient sheets. I stood with Lila, who adjusted my collar like a sisterly sergeant, then squeezed my elbow. Ask your questions, she said. Don't apologize for the answers they reveal. Raya took her place among the observers. Crix arrived without arriving. No fanfare, no escort, just the sudden fact of him in a seat that fit. His eyes passed over Raya and paused a fraction too long, like a hand pressing where a bruise will form. When the Heritage Director introduced the agenda, resource allocations, Covenant enforcement audits, a proposal to add a memory health clause to exchange contracts, Crix's voice entered the room like grapefruit peel over gin. We harbor the young of 100 peoples, he intoned. We owe them safety first. I raised my hand before the smart part of me tackled the rest. Terran, the director said. Speak. I appreciate the concern for safety, I said. Could we define it? Because in Terran law, safety includes freedom from coercion, from institutional retaliation, and from non-consensual medical procedures. Does the proposed clause preclude memory revision without the subject's explicit consent? The director blinked. Crix smiled at temperature. Memory interventions are used rarely and only to prevent lasting harm, he said. The clause clarifies our care. Whose definition of harm, I asked. Because I read last year's Covenant audit, and it categorized consensual relationships as harm to culture, not to people. If we reframe harm as what happens to persons rather than to abstractions, do we revise the covenant first or the clause? The room did that thing rooms do when someone flips a heavy table on their head. Lila pressed her knuckles to her mouth to keep the laugh from becoming ammunition. Raya's tail in the gallery drew a coil that meant ready. Crix's violet gaze found me and placed me somewhere tidy. Terran, he said mildly, you mistake our care for control. And you mistake your control for care, I said. So politely it almost sounded like I hadn't meant to stab him. A counselor cleared a throat. The director snapped the agenda forward like a fan. Crix let the moment pass as if he had chosen to, which is a way of losing that feels like winning. After, as the chamber drained of people and the echo of speeches, Crix approached me with a smile that would have fooled an infant and no one else. You have a talent for mischief, he said. I have an allergy to euphemism, I replied. Be careful, Terran. He leaned closer, voice intimate as a threat wrapped in velvet. This university is full of archivists. Good, I said. I like records. His mouth didn't move and somehow still smiled. You will, he murmured, when you are one. He left the scent of something metallic behind. Raya reached me a minute later, eyes bright with worry disguised as mockery. You ask like you mean to be erased, she said. I ask like someone should be, I answered. Not it. Her tail wrote a sign whose gloss slid into my chest like a hand. Brave/fool. The Vulpine stacked those meanings when they were trying to decide which to spend. They didn't even wait a day. The notice hit my communicator mid-lecture, the tone an institutional chime that manages to sound both bland and devastating. Subject: interim suspension. Allegations: disruption of administrative process, interference with cultural safeguards, unprofessional conduct in council, potential compromise of covenant compliance. My mouth found a curse and held hard. By the time I reached our suite, Raya was there with 3 windows floating over her desk, the suspension letter, a doctrine manual I recognized from the council, a dossier labeled M-A-L-V-E-R-O-N. Actions and aliases. The torque at her throat glowed dull gold, the color of heat behind walls. Of course, she said, tail tip cutting the air like a metronome with a broken heart. He cannot win the room, so he will try to empty it. I didn't disrupt, I said. I asked. You forced definition. Her ears tilted. Power hates that. We appeal, I said automatically. We reached for her like a reflex. I caught it and waited to see if it would be allowed. Raya didn't look up from the dossier. We, she agreed. We make the appeal publicly. We make it now. To Kel we went. The glass thread took the suspension letter with a gentleness that felt like triage and pulled my data into a filing too complex for my sleep-deprived brain to register. We can force an open review, Kel said. They will try to close it. You will smile like sunlight and make closure look like cowardice. That's my only party trick, I admitted. Kel's eyes warmed. Raya, your contribution? Raya slid the M-A-L-V-E-R-O-N file into the light. He ceded 2 previous violations by misrepresenting dietary customs to arrange a ritual contact. He then argued correlation between exchange programming and covenant breaches. I have the messages. He anonymized. He did not anonymize well. Kel's harmonized voice gained a razor. We'll route this through the Alumni Oversight Panel. They dislike being used as theater props. Everyone should, I said. At scale? Kel asked. They don't. The hearing was set for dawn, as if shame was best served on empty stomachs. Lila snuck me a roll the size of my head and a thermos of contraband espresso. For sunlight? She said, and pinched my cheek like an ant in a sitcom we'd never film. Raya watched me drink, then took a sip because Vulpine are curious killers. She coughed once, eyes watering, and said, Your species invents punishments and calls them flavors. Spoken like someone who has never met cilantro Janes, I said, which made no sense here at all. But the laugh uncoiled something taut in the room, and we needed that. They tried to close the hearing. We pried it open with procedural levers Kel had polished to mirror shine. The chamber filled with faculty who wanted witness. Students who wanted rumor, administrators who wanted plausible deniability. Crix came dressed in sobriety, which on him looked like theater with the sound turned off. The oversight chair, a wiry being whose joints clicked like knitting needles, read the allegations, asked if I understood them, and waited. I understand the letter, I said. I do not accept the premise. Define the premise, the chair said, without looking up from their notes. That righteous speech can be categorized as disruption to a process designed to avoid hearing it. A murmur. The chair's knitting click paused. Proceed. Kell projected the M-A-L-V-E-R-O-N dossier, not scandal. Crix was too careful for naked lawbreaking, but pattern, intention, arrangement. Students guided into accidental settings that triggered covenant scrutiny, anonymous reports filed with impossible precision, policy briefs arguing that such incidents proved the covenant's necessity. Lord Malveron, Kell intoned, we invite you to explain how your anonymous report came from a device registered to your aid and routed through your family's secure node. Crix's chin lifted a millimeter. We all serve culture, he said. I facilitated compliance. Subcommittees do this work. You seeded a scene, called it a storm, and sold umbrellas, I said, which wasn't legally helpful but made 3 counselors hide a smile behind their hands. The chair tapped a stylus. The suspension is lifted pending further review, they declared after a long minute in which Crix perfected the art of stillness as dominance. We will investigate both the allegations against Mr. Cade and the evidence of procedural abuse presented here. We walked out into morning that felt newly invented. In the courtyard, Raya stopped by a stand of glass-limbed trees and pressed her palm to one until the bark warmed. Her tail traced a word that my implant delivered without adornment: relief. You okay? I asked. Her amber eyes were very bright. No, she said, but I am. Less not okay. Progress, I said. An avalanche is progress, she replied dryly. It moves. Let's try a river, I said. They carve without collapsing. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Terran metaphors multiply when you're hungry. Everything multiplies when I'm hungry. I glanced at the dining hall. Come eat bad porridge. Vulpine porridge is never bad, she said, feigning scandal. We have standards. Teach me, I said, and did not mean porridge. Her ears flicked, startled, then softened. Careful, she murmured. With porridge? I asked, entirely innocent. With answers, she said. The Constellation Festival came like a holiday invented for a campus civics exam, stations showcasing arts, sciences, cuisines, courtship dances, minus the courtship. The Covenant had turned that practice into a museum exhibit. Look, don't touch. Admire, don't mimic. Memorize, don't learn. My lab team ran a booth where the translation mesh translated laughter into harmonic textures. Lila convinced 3 sky swimmers to teach Terrans a drift dance we were comically unsuited for. Kell's people ran Consent Commons, a place to rehearse asking in 50 languages. On the perimeter, a knot of Heritage Committee volunteers offered pamphlets with careful fonts. Crix worked the crowd like a bead of oil through water, never touching, always reshaping the surface. When he reached our booth, he complimented the mesh and did not look at Rhea at all. That not looking landed like a hand. You could make a career of this, he told me, voice bright with interest he did not feel. I plan to make a world of it, I said, cheerful as a blade at a ribbon cutting. Ambition is charming at your age, he said, and stepped away. Someone should undo his sentences while he sleeps, Lila muttered. Don't, I said, he'd dream in bullets. As evening bloomed, the central plaza dimmed. Lanterns winged through air in flocks that settled into constellations. Each cluster matched a story told by a different culture. The Vulpine pattern chased a fox made of fire across a river of sparks. A dozen Vulpine students braided a dance. No, not braided. Braided was too slow a verb. Their tales wrote history into the dark. Raya was among them, not central but keystone, motion precise and free all at once. I stood in the crowd and felt something long and old and stubborn in me say, I will not ask to feel less. When the dance ended, Raya found me at the edge of it all. She smelled faintly of rain on warm stone. "Did you watch?" she asked, like a joke. She'd seen me watching. "I learned 6 words," I said, "and forgot 5. Teach me the last one." She hesitated, then wrote it with the smallest tip of her tail against my wrist. The implant delivered it like a gift it wasn't built to carry. Belong. We stood a moment in the hush that follows meaning. Then someone screamed. The sound cleaved the plaza, Lantern stuttered. A cluster of Heritage Committee volunteers had dragged a pair of students apart. Farsong and Vulpine, hands still looped from a dance. Voices like knives, accusations thickening the air. "Covenant," someone shouted. "Violation." An administrator elbowed through. "This is staged," Kel hissed at my shoulder. "He needs tonight to curdle." Crix appeared beside the "What is?" he breathed. "Who I am," she answered. Her tail moved. The drone turned to follow. In a sliver of wind, a motion changed. Not a misstep, not a threat, and almost. I took a step between them that the drone caught as a lunge. Crix's aide cried out. The drone blossomed red. He smiled. "Of course he did. Threat documented," he said sweetly. "It's so exhausting when Terrans forget their place." "You never quite learned mine," Raya said. "We left before the bridge taught us what falling tasted like. The footage would be edited. The narrative would be shaped. It always is." Back in the Hall of Silence, Lila threw a pen far enough that it drafted a letter to Gravity. "He's not playing rope," she said. "He's playing loom." Kel rubbed their eyes as if to push a thought back in. "We need the alumni," they said. "We need donors who care about optics more than obedience." "People like my grandmother," I muttered, and then realized that was not a metaphor. I opened a channel I had sworn I wouldn't use, the kind that pings family who wear medals like arguments, and typed the worst message of my life. "Could you call the Oralis Alumni Council and ask them if their money looks better when it doesn't smell like fear?" Her reply was a string of disapproving emojis and the promise of a war that wore pearls. "The long room only opens when enough people say its name at once. It is not magic, it is policy disguised as myth. Oversight? Alumni? Council? Heritage? Student reps? When a quorum invokes it, arguments move from planets to table." We sat at the far end because Kel and I are tall and Lila needs legroom. Raya took a seat at my right, Crix at the other end, equal distance like a geometry lesson about tension. The chair called us to order. The Alumni Council logged in with faces both generous and terrified. Donors hate being told they have funded cruelty. They prefer to imagine accidental side effects. Kel presented our case. Data trails, seated incidents, a consent form that smelled of leash. I spoke to memory as a country you cannot keep colonized. Lila spoke to joy as infrastructure. "You cut capacity when you criminalize wonder," she said, which made an alum cry. Crix made his case too. He spoke of fragile people saved by the Covenant. He infused fragile with honor. He sold a history that was not quite true and not quite false, which is a kind of poison. And then the chair did the thing chairs do when they want to watch people break or build themselves. "We invite testimony," they said. "First-hand, specific." Raya stood. She did not speak at first. She let the room look at her, and the room did not know what to do with the sight, an orange, furred Vulpine with a human's mouth making a shape it did not trust. When she did speak, her voice did not shake. "My house arranged my future with a boy who thought obligation was a song and I was the note," she said. She did not look down the table. She did not look away. I did not agree. I asked to study where I could be a person, not a chessboard. I came here. She told them about learning to count bonding layers with a clock that respected fear. She told them about seeing the Covenant used as a net to catch consent and call it contraband. She told them about the Vigil, how a list of names can be a weapon, how a culture can be defended by people who never asked the people if they wanted that defense. "I am Vulpine," she said. "I will remain Vulpine if I kiss a Terran. You do not protect me by stealing the part of me that hopes, or by teaching me to pretend I do not hope. Silence has flavors. This one tasted of throat. Crix did not move. Raya, he said at last, and put love into the word like glass around a candle. Do not let them make you a banner. I prefer bridge, she said, or fire. The chair cleared their throat. The motion, they said carefully, is to suspend the voluntary clarification proposal and open formal review of the Covenant's enforcement mechanisms, with special attention to consent, redaction, and student autonomy. Votes rolled like a small tide. It passed. Not annulment, not victory, but a turn in the road that meant the map had to be redrawn. We filed out. In the corridor, Lila cried the way warriors do, like it's an annoying weather pattern. Kel leaned a shoulder to the wall and laughed into their own hand, which is how people survive joy when it finally comes without permission. Crick stopped before us, and for the first time he looked tired. You will find, he said, that changing a law is easier than changing the people who think it made them safe. We'll bring them new safety, I said. Bring them new stories, Raya corrected. Safety grows there. Crix considered her, then me, then the hall. You think you have moved me, he said. You have only made me patient. It's good, I said. Patience dulls swords. He left. Raya stood there with light in her hair, looking like someone who had run across a long bridge and reached the other side and discovered, to her mild astonishment, that the ground did not collapse under her feet. Life did not become simple because we made a room vote. The Covenant did not evaporate to applause. Administrators still believed in obedience. Donors still needed to read their checks in a mirror that said benevolence. Crix still wielded influence like a scalpel and smiled like grief. But the campus changed its gait. Consent Commons filled with laughter that didn't apologize. The vigil became a festival where names were said and returned to their owners as keys. The memory vault posted a notice. No REDACTIONS during appeals. It looked like a sign about fire exits. It was. In the suite, Raya rehearsed less to forget danger and more to become ready for it without letting it own her posture. We talked, and when we ran out of strategy, we talked more. The counting continued. We were careful. We were reckless. We were doomed, and not. One night, we sat at the window, feet on the sill, city striped with light. She leaned her head against my shoulder and watched a bridge's reflection reframe itself as wind. Do you know the Vulpine word for a long fight you entered by accident and kept, because staring down a storm is how you learned your face? She asked. I do not, I said. Teach me twice. She wrote it across my palm with the very tip of her tail, and the implant refused to translate, which felt like respect. Do you know the Terran word for the moment the ground becomes yours again, even if the law doesn't know it yet? I asked. Say it, she said. Home, I replied. That is small, she said. That is big, I said. We argued like that for an hour because neither of us liked to let the other have the last word unless the last word was a kiss. The kiss, when we said it between us, was not a rebellion. It was a sentence we had been writing for months and finally allowed to end with punctuation. Not an exclamation mark. A period, firm and quiet. And then, taking a breath, a new sentence. The year went on because years do that. Oversight drafted reforms. The Heritage Committee drafted rebuttals. Alumni sent money and caveats. The glass thread turned from crisis triage to policy design and got very boring on purpose. Lila started a bakery in her lab because rebellion needs carbohydrates. Crix did not become our friend. He became something else, an opponent who finally said aloud in a private room with no cameras, I was told to keep things as they are so that the people who made them do not have to be afraid they were wrong. You could tell them a different story, Raya said. My house would write me out, he said. Then take a new name, I said. He looked at me as if I had suggested he learn to breathe underwater. On the last day of the term, the sky did a weird Terran-friendly blue as if to say you may go home, but you will not be the person who left. I stood with my duffel by the door of our suite. Raya stood with her hand on the heat panel, warming the nest for the next occupant. Vulpine rituals ask you to leave spaces better than you found them. I touched the espresso device and left 3 extra coils. We will write, I said. We will count, she replied. We will win, I said. We will live, she corrected, which is the larger victory. At the threshold, I looked back. The room looked smaller, which means you grew. Raya stepped close and kissed me once like a signature and once like a title page. Try not to get erased, Terran, she said softly. You first, I whispered. She made a huff that meant if I insist on being ridiculous, I should at least be effective. Then she turned to the window, tail-drawing a word that my implant didn't translate, because sometimes meaning has to spend time in your ribs before your head can name it. On the shuttle, Earth growing as a blue comma, I opened a file I had been writing in my head and typed a title. How to carry your teeth without biting what you love. Under it, I wrote the first sentence. On Auralis, I learned that safety and control wear the same perfume until you taste the air they leave behind. And below that, a second. On Auralis, I learned that a fox-tailed girl with orange fur and human eyes could teach a human boy to become a citizen of his own courage. Then I wrote the rest, because the work after the war is always the story you tell that makes the next fight a little less necessary. The inquiry moved faster than anyone predicted. Chiron's family, desperate to preserve their honor, poured resources into suppressing the Silver Thread's revelations. Rumors rippled across the university. Professors whispered, students speculated, and administrators tried to appear neutral while carefully aligning themselves with whoever looked most likely to win. For Orion, every day was a test of patience. He felt the eyes of strangers on him, some admiring his defiance, others waiting for him to slip. Lyara never wavered. She walked at his side through the bustling halls, her orange fur shimmering beneath the university's crystalline lights, her silver eyes sharp with resolve. You realize, she murmured one evening, her tail brushing lightly against his hand, if we push this too far, they won't just expel us, they'll erase us. Orion smirked, though his chest was tight. Then, let's give them something unforgettable before they try. That night, Lyara led him deeper into the Silver Thread's hidden network. A plan was taking shape, not just to defend Orion's place at the university, but to expose the entire Keros family's manipulation of the exchange program. Orion knew it was madness, but when Lyara looked at him, her fur glowing faintly in the dim light, he believed they could pull it off. The next council meeting was war in all but name. Chiron arrived cloaked in nobility, his violet eyes gleaming with contempt. His speech was polished, painting himself as a guardian of culture, a victim of baseless accusations. The chamber echoed with his voice, each word sharpened like a blade. Then Orion stood. His human voice cracked the air with raw honesty, different from the calculated tones around him. I didn't come here to play your games. I came to learn, to represent my world. But every step of the way, someone tried to tell me I didn't belong. Not because I broke rules, but because I threatened a fragile ego. Murmurs swept the chamber. Lyara stepped forward, her orange fur shimmering, silver eyes burning. This isn't about a human exchange student. This is about control. Families like the Keros have ruled through fear and tradition, but the galaxy has changed. Students from 100 worlds sit here together every day. If love, trust, and choice are dangerous, then maybe the danger isn't in us. It's in you. Even the officials, bound by politics, couldn't ignore the shift in the room. For the first time, Chiron looked uncertain. His mask had cracked. The Silver Thread released their evidence the next morning. Data streams spread across the campus and beyond, revealing decades of quiet manipulations. Professors blackmailed, students silenced, alliances forged through coercion. The Keros family's name, once untouchable, now carried the weight of scandal. Chiron tried to rally, but every move he made was countered by whispers of corruption and arrogance. His violet eyes, once sharp with certainty, now carried the shadow of desperation. When he finally confronted Orion and Lyara in the courtyard, his voice trembled beneath its practiced calm. You think this changes anything? Families like mine do not fall to children's rebellions? Lyara stepped forward, her tail coiling protectively around Orion's wrist. No, she said softly, her ears flicking. But they fall when the children refuse to inherit their chains. For the first time, Chiron had no reply. He left without another word, his figure swallowed by the murmuring crowd. The university's policies shifted in the aftermath. Slowly, cautiously, the outdated restrictions on interspecies relationships began to erode. Officials couched it in language about modernization and cultural adaptation, but Orion and Lyara both knew the truth. The world had changed because they had refused to bend. Late one night, on a balcony beneath the twin moons, Orion leaned against the railing, the cool air. The door we needed was marked with an icon shaped like a seed. Appropriate. Seeds hold instructions with teeth. I palmed a wafer into the lock that rephrased our request in a grammar the door couldn't refuse. The smell of citrus sharpened. "This will get us in," I whispered. "It won't keep us hidden." "Then we write quickly," Raya said. Inside, a room full of asleep machines, and a table with an old habit, a bowl of coins for bribing ghosts. I popped the wafer into a port, and the sleeper stacks woke like animals in tall grass. The Heritage Committee's queue unrolled. Incidents flagged, notes attached. Unsupervised contact at Starlight Bridge, one read. Anonymous report from concerned observer. I traced the anonymization, found a family node, and almost smiled. He had anonymized well. I wrote better. Raya's hand touched my wrist. "Fast," she murmured. "Someone is coming." I pushed a bundle to Kel with a signature oversight couldn't ignore, then began packing the machine back into the shape of innocence. The door sighed open. A figure stepped in wearing a scent I had wanted not to remember, metal and bitter rind. Crick stopped when he saw us, surprise flickering for the length of an inhale. "This room is restricted," he said, which was true. "You are out of bounds." "We're formatting a petition," I said, which was also true in a way that would not survive scrutiny. We needed a quiet machine. His eyes moved to Raya and held. "You should teach your Terran not to trespass," he told her, like a father scolding in front of neighbors. "I am not his keeper," she said, and her voice had stones in it. "Pity," he murmured. "He may need one." He stepped aside to let us out. My skin crawled with the certainty that we had not eluded him so much as entered his next step on purpose. Back at the Hall of Silence, Kel met us, eyes bright like a tide with a storm hiding under it. "We have enough," they said. "Enough to crack the marble. Not enough to topple the building." "Sometimes cracks are where light comes in," I said. "And sometimes," Kel replied, "they are where the wind gets its knives." The message arrived at dawn on a channel I had never registered. "Meet me at the Arboretum. Come alone." RSV. She was waiting under the canopy of the sentinel trees, where the air tasted faintly of pepper and green tea. Her tail was still, her ears forward, the torque at her throat dim as waiting. "I hate messages like that," I said lightly. "You could have said, 'Meet me where the sky is green and the pest smells like rain.' Poetry invites the wrong people," she said. "Who is the right person?" I asked, soft. She looked at me as if the question was both cruel and kind. "Noah," she said, "the covenant turns us into liars or saints, and I have never been good at sainthood." "I am a wretched liar," I admitted. "Then we are poor material," she said, and the tail drew a word I refused to look up. If the implant named it, it would become smaller. In my chest, without a label, it could be everything. She stepped closer. "Vulpiri bond in layers," she said. "Clinical like a safe house. Touch, scent, gaze, words, we count them. We pace them. We do not." Her voice faltered. "We do not rush." "You have a word for rushing the counting?" I asked. She wrote it against my sleeve. The implant translated with a wince. Reckless/tender/doomed. "I don't want to be doomed," I said. "I don't want you erased," she replied. We stood in the shade of the trees until the light shifted into a new color, and the torque at her throat warmed again with messages she did not read. Raya's hand lifted, hovered, fell. "He will escalate," she whispered. "He will not let the inquiry wound his pride without making something bleed." "He can't," I said. "He doesn't have that kind of authority." "He has friends," she said. Authority is just friendship dressed in badges. Then we'll wear better clothes, I said. We'll dress friendship like an army. She made a sound between laugh and sob and pressed her palm against my chest as if measuring something invisible. I want, she began, and the sentence fled into leaves. Me too, I said, and didn't rush the counting. If you want to break a covenant, you must first know where it sleeps. The memory vault was a rumor with an address. We had traced 3 redaction orders to the same sublevel. Kell's model suggested a physical signature required a human or human-like presence. Redactions weren't fully automated. There was still a hand to hold the blade. We go in, Lila said. We copy policies. We come out. Easy, I said. Catastrophic, Kell corrected. Also easy. The vault door wasn't a door. It was an absence of wall, a negative space that admitted only those wearing a credential that said "We belong" in a font no one could counterfeit, but everyone could read. We made our say it with such conviction the absence couldn't tell the difference. Inside, the temperature fell to wine cellar cool. Cabinets lined the walls, each marked with symbols that described what had been taken rather than what was there. I had never seen a room so honest about theft. We found what we needed: policy slips, signatures, requests written in the hand of the Heritage Subcommittee chair. In the corner, a machine like a cradle full of light. In its belly, a queue, 3 names scheduled for therapeutic revision in the next 2 cycles. One of them was mine. I thought they lifted your suspension, Lila whispered. They did, I said. Crix didn't. Raya's ears flattened so fast the movement sounded like a hush. Her tail wrote a word that translated as "do not." We pull the power, I said. Kell shook their head. We expose the list. We force oversight to ban emergency redactions while inquiry is open. If we cut power, they claim sabotage and restore under lockdown. I swallowed the urge to rip cables like weeds. Strategy hurts when the wound wants a fist. On our way out, the absence of wall recognized that it had been tricked and protested loudly. We became wind. We became a coincidence no camera could explain well without a villain. Crix emerged from a side corridor at the exact wrong time to be a coincidence. Vault tours, I said, breathless and bright. You should consider public programming. I know a Terran who can do the pamphlets. You mistake your laughter for armor, he said. And you mistake your diction for destiny, I replied. If you come for my head, bring better knives. His smile did not lift his eyes. Who says I want your head, Terran? He asked. Hearts make better levers. Behind me, I felt Raya become heat. The campus changed color in the next 2 days, a slow bleed from studied neutrality to something like weather. Oversight froze redactions. Glass crack win. The Heritage Committee shot memos like darts. Kell slept 4 hours in 48 and smiled with the corner of a mouth. Lila installed espresso IVs in the lab and declared herself a doctor. Raya moved through it all with the steadiness of a beacon that refused to be turned. She spent long hours with Vulpine students running a peer network for Covenant-safe support, then twice that long in a back room with a legal shard advising on appeals she did not herself file. We spoke briefly, often, urgently, always as if time had been cut into smaller coins. Crix became more public. He sat in easy circles and asked generous questions. He gave an interview to the alumni feed in which he never said my name and made me an argument anyway. He smiled at cameras without showing teeth. The thing about storms is you only know you're in one when branches start arriving in unlikely places. Auralis held a night vigil, the Constellation Festival's coda, to honor those whose memories had been altered for their own safety in the last decade. We gathered in the amphitheater while lanterns wrote names in light. Half the names were initials for privacy, half were words like unrecorded at request. It felt like a museum of holes. When the lanterns finished their list, people spoke, gentle, halting, angry, precise. A Terran talked about loving a person whose species considered names edible. The redaction took the taste of cinnamon from his mouth. A Vulpine student described the sensation of touching a memory and finding a paw print where once there had been a hand. Raya did not speak. She sat with her tail wrapped around her forearm like a promise she could keep in public. I wanted to take her hand. I didn't. I rested mine on the bench between us. palm up, and let it be an open parenthesis. After, in the hush that follows grief, she slipped her fingers into mine like writing a word that had been waiting. We sat that way for a while, two hands becoming the argument the Covenant most feared, not desire as conquest, but tenderness as counter-law. When we stood, Crick stood in our path. "Vigil suits you, Raya," he said softly. "You wear piety like perfume." "You wear certainty like a mask," she replied. He turned his eyes to our hands. No flicker of triumph, no rage, just a cool addition to a ledger. "Careful," he murmured, so soft only we could hear. "Even saints can be erased." Raya's tail wrote a word against my wrist that translated as, "Do not apologize. Do not flee. Do not break." "Some of us memorize too easily," I said. "We remember how not to kneel." "Some of us," he said, "learn to make kneeling look like dance." He left us with the taste of iron. We expected the next council session to be a hearing on process abuses. It began as a budget meeting. That's a trick tyrants love. Shift the ground beneath the argument. Make the floorboards groan. When Kell stood to introduce new evidence, an audit trail that threaded 3 anonymous, Covenant reports straight to a Heritage Committee terminal. Crex's aide objected on procedural grounds. The files were obtained unlawfully. "We walked through a door," I said. "A restricted one," the aide shot back. "Restriction is a mood," Lila muttered, not into a microphone. The chair heard anyway, and their mouth did something that meant a laugh had recently been here. The chamber bent in two, those who valued process as shield and those who valued it as instrument. Crix moved between them like a man who could read rooms and letters and rewrite both. "Let us not reward theft," he said. "Nor should we allow this place to become a court for petty feuds. The Covenant is not on trial." "That's what people say when it is," I said, soft, to my own record. The chair ruled narrowly, evidence admissible for internal review, no public censure, oversight to recommend reforms to reporting protocols. A tiny wind wrapped in beige. After I found Kell in the corridor staring into the kind of middle distance that keeps secrets. "We cut air holes," they said. No more. "Breathing is good," I replied. "Better than drowning politely." Raya appeared out of the stream of departing bodies. "Crix will try a different door," she said. "He wants a demonstration, not a lecture." "What kind of demonstration?" I asked. "The kind that calls itself mercy and sells itself as law," she said. We looked at one another and felt the shape of what was coming and wished, collectively, to be wrong. It came as an offer. The Heritage Committee proposed a voluntary clarification. Students in cross-species pairings could sign a preemptive consent authorizing memory revision if their relationship compromised cultural integrity. Signers would receive protected status from disciplinary action in exchange. "Mercy," Crick said to the camera. "We provide pathways. We do not punish hearts. We protect cultures." "We are not patients," Lila snarled. "We are people." "We are not diseases," Raya said, tail writing fire. The glass thread responded with a campaign. "We consent to choice." Oversight pushed back gently, very oralis, requesting stakeholder input. The committee scheduled a forum. It was not a forum. It was a stage where one side brought science and history, the other brought seasoned rhetoric. Crick stood and spoke of the first covenant during a war no one wanted to remember. He spoke of extinctions that had nothing to do with love. He braided them anyway. He promised safety, a word that covered a multitude of sins. When my turn came, I walked to the lectern with my nervous humor wearing very quiet shoes. "My grandmother taught me to make dumplings," I said. "She said you can always taste the difference between a meal prepared from love and a meal prepared to buy forgiveness." The room tilted its head. "This consent you ask of us," I continued, "tastes like the latter. You call it safety. But safety that asks you to sign your future self away is not safety. It is a leash." I thought of Raya's fingers threaded through mine in the vigil's hush. "If you want to protect culture," I said, Teach us how to honor it without turning people into fuel. If you want to protect people, stop writing contracts that plan their forgetting." Crix's mouth reflected nothing. When the forum adjourned, he cornered me in a corridor that smelled of wax and old songs. "You speak as if the world owes you your desire," he said. "No," I replied. "I speak as if the world owes us our choices." "Choice is a luxury of the secure," he said. "Then make more people secure," I answered. "Stop selling the rest of us to their fear." He leaned in as if telling a joke. "She is your lever," he whispered. "Thank you for delivering it to me." I tasted copper. "You've had her in your hand since you were both children," I said. "The reason you hate us is that your grip is slipping." For the first time, his expression moved toward anger and then remembered where it was. "You will lose her," he said. "One way or another." "Not to you," I said. He left. I leaned against the wall and let my heart throw itself at my ribs until it felt like it might break them and do something useful with the broken pieces. The next escalation didn't look like escalation. It looked like a study session on Skybridge 12, a suspended walkway edged with low rails and high wind. Kel had chosen it because the acoustics made whispering treacherous and shouting performative. We were supposed to diagram the policy paths: oversight reform, heritage obstruction, council appetite. We got there first. Then Crix arrived with 2 aides and a camera drone. "Good evening," he said, polite enough to be obscene. "I am here as a private citizen." "Of course," Kel said, without making it a question. "Words, then. Prosperous ones." He made a case for the voluntary clarification again while the drone recorded our faces, learning we were wartime. He turned to Raya as if what mattered lived behind her eyes. "You would be safe," he said. "Sign, and nothing else is required." Raya stood like a dancer about to choose a rhythm. "Safety that costs me plausible deniability is not safety," she said. "It is preemptive surrender." He stepped closer. The bridge felt longer and narrower than it had before. "Is your Terran worth this?" he asked, a whisper the drone would not hear. "He is not the question," she said, thunder under silk.